Hello,
Hello.
welcome back
Two.
to it's
It's your time you're
you're wasting.
wasting.
You're wasting. Yeah, it is your time you're wasting, and you're wasting it with the devilishly handsome Martin Robinson and
And
me.
the man with all the medals, David Dido. Yes.
Thank you, Frank.
You
Thank you very
you've got
much.
you're
Yeah,
hiding the
no,
medals with your head.
I,
I'm sure you're not
well,
meaning to.
I'm shining. I'm hiding my light under a bushel.
You are, yes.
Yeah, no. On that front, Martin, I'm afraid to say, I've picked up my first running injury, so I'm out of action this week.
Is it like a
I've
stitch
got
or something like that?
yeah, yeah. It's it's I've stubbed my toe. I've got medial tibial
Hang
stress.
on, you lost all your toenails the other day. Last time we talked about
I
this.
mean, not the other. I still,
That's an
yeah. I
injury.
mean, yeah. It didn't stop me doing anything. I just carried on.
It'll stop you cutting your
If anyone's,
toenails.
I don't need to cut my toenails. That's a real bonus. I'm,
Okay.
I'm enjoying that. Yeah, no toenail clipping required for me. Yeah, I had to go to the podiatrist and have all my toenails sort of dremeled off some months ago now. But yeah, we're through that, and I'm enjoying post toenail life. But I'm not enjoying medial tibial stress.
Right.
That's
No one's got
yeah
any idea
the
what that is apart from those who are obviously in the know. So
yeah
most of us don't
PE
know.
teachers will know all about that,
They
won't
won't
they?
know anything. No, sorry. PE teachers, no, no.
PE
Don't cry.
teachers
Don't
are
cry.
they even listening? No, yeah. So basically, it's the muscle along my shin is very sore, and the advice is not to run through it. So I'm not, and I'm doing exercises with this, Martin, a
Yes.
foam roller.
Oh dear. You can paint your
Yeah,
walls afterwards, which is
I
nice.
can. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can paint them orange.
Yeah. Oh, is it got orange paint on it? Is that what the thing is,
That's right. That's how
or
they come. That's
could you use
Yeah,
other colours
they
are
they
available?
look pretty innocuous, don't they? I mean, maybe they don't. Actually, that could look pretty threatening in some circumstances. But these are brutal. They're absolutely agonising. Um, and for all the good it's doing me, I might as well stick it up my arse. No, obviously not.
And on that note, I don't know where we go with that one. I think we've
No.
gone down a dead end.
Well, maybe we
I
segue,
like that one.
Martin,
Oh dear. No. Right.
into Tourette's.
We bloody hell, that's a hell of a segue. Look, I
Well,
was
that was one of the things that I mean, obviously, viewers will know, have be aware of the debacle at the Baftas.
debacle,
Debacle. Do you like
debacle,
that? Debacle at the Baftas.
debacle, debacle.
Oh, I'd like to call it a debacle.
Sorry, I'm posher than you, clearly.
You are
Debacle.
posher than me. Everyone says it. Yeah. No.
Look, we
Absolutely
did
right.
actually, because we haven't been online for a long time, but we did a live
No.
show the other day,
Yeah, we did. We
and
did. At
we
Research Ed in Birmingham.
yeah, and that was a grand day out was had by all, and we did a talk, not a talk, we did a
No, not at all.
podcast without the podding. So,
Yeah, we forgot to
without the
record anything.
casting as well, to be
Yeah.
truthful.
Well, the
So,
cast were all there, and we had a live room audience, a room full of people who were participating and telling us what they reckoned and all
yeah,
of
and
that
they were
sort. It
very,
was
very
like
good. Very good.
it was
The,
like it was like Newsnight or something.
it
Not
was
Newsnight.
well,
What's the other?
question
Question
time.
time.
That's the one.
Yeah,
It was what
yeah. It
was
was for
interesting
you and
is
yours.
yeah we thought we'd do something on the BAFTA thing, the Tourette's, and thinking about what it would be like in the classroom, and we asked the innocent question, thinking there'll be hardly anyone. How many of you
Yeah,
have had someone in your classroom with Tourette's? And
and they
about a
all their
third
hands
to a
shot up, didn't they?
half or even more,
Probably not. Probably more nearer a third, I'd say.
yeah, put their hands
But
up, and that
still,
was
still, yeah, I know.
more than we thought.
It was more than we thought, and so especially as we hadn't said what we were talking about, so they
Yeah,
didn't come. They didn't
yeah,
come
yeah, yeah.
primed to talk about Tourette's.
No.
So yeah, it was a bit of a surprise, wasn't it? And so there were various teachers telling us about children using the N word in lessons, using various F and C bombs and all of this sort of stuff, and the different strategies that teachers and schools have to deal with this, and it was kind of fascinating. But should we just give a bit of context for anyone that's kind of been in a hole and isn't aware of what happened at the BAFTAs? What did happen, Martin?
Right. So the BAFTAs, which is the British Film and
Okay.
Television Awards. I'm just trying to
I'm
work
glad
out
you
what the
I'm
first
glad you
A is
spelt that
for.
out, Martin.
Yeah. What's the
British
first A for?
Academy.
British
British
Academy of
Academy.
Film and Television Awards. So two A, yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
we're giving out its awards, blah blah blah. And the first award that it gave out that evening was for something or other. I've forgotten what that is. But two black actors came up who were in the film. I've forgotten the name of that film.
Yeah,
That's a
the
very good
Sinners, a
Sinners. That's
fantastic
it.
film.
Yeah. Have you seen
If
Sinners?
you haven't, oh, I love it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
wonderful. Have you not seen it?
I haven't seen Sinners. No.
Oh, I'd really recommend it. It's kind of superficially, it's sort of a horror film. There's
Yeah.
vampires and stuff, but I
And
think it's a
musical.
film about music. Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
I
So
loved it.
a great
Really,
movie that.
best thing I've seen in a long time.
Oh, you haven't seen Epic yet, then, have you? Elvis
No,
Presley in concert. That's the one. Anyway, move on.
I haven't
Uh,
seen it. I haven't.
but there are two black actors. It's quite a.
Yeah,
It's a film heavily
Michael
heavily
C.
black
Michael C.
cast, isn't it?
Jordan, isn't it? And oh, what's the other fella? Delroy Lindo.
And they came on to award and started to, as soon as they got on stage, started speaking, and then the N word was shouted out from the audience. Now, I wasn't watching it at the time, but I did
No.
look it up on iPlayer afterwards when it was
Yeah.
still on iPlayer,
Right.
and it was very difficult to pick it out if you didn't know what was going on. But they certainly could hear it, and they certainly clocked
Reacted.
it, shall we say?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And afterwards, this became the
A
thing.
social storm, didn't it?
It became a social media storm,
So why
and
did it happen? Why on earth would somebody shout out the N word at an awards ceremony?
because there's another film which I also haven't seen, which I think was recommended that we all saw, all teachers should see,
Yeah.
which
I
is I
swear.
Swear, and it's about a sort of semi-autobiographical take by John Davidson,
Yeah.
a,
No relation
biographical
to
take
Jim.
about John Davidson's life, and he's a campaigner for Tourette's in Scotland mainly, and now he's gone worldwide in his
Of
fame.
course, yeah, yeah.
And to some extent, it'll be interesting to see the ramifications of this newfound fame and notoriety, and it's the balance between the two is what a lot of the problem has been, of course, in that some people are saying that his Tourette's, which led to him saying that, is actually something, perhaps it's his subconscious coming out,
Yeah,
that he has some sort of control over it and he is deep down
yeah.
a white supremacist or something like that. Or that Tourette's, in some cases, not every case, in fact, I think it's a minority of cases, Tourette's leads to people shouting. It has a word, doesn't it? Can you tell me that word?
Coprolalia.
Coprolalia.
Yeah.
That is about 20 to 30% of Tourette's
10 to
sufferers.
15.
10 to 15.
Yeah, you doubled it there, but
They shout out words
yeah.
that
So it's
perhaps can be offensive.
relatively rare amongst those that suffer with Tourette. So it's a minority of Tourette sufferers that have coprolalia. But for those that do, the kind of the really kind of grim thing about it for sufferers is that firstly, it's neurologically involuntary. So you literally have no control over it. It's also, and I find this really fascinating, it's context sensitive. So what happens is that your brain involuntarily selects the most taboo, the most socially catastrophic thing that you could possibly say in a given circumstance. So it's almost like it's the opposite of thinking, okay, this is what I really feel, and my mask has slipped. It's it's something deep rooted in the neurobiology of a sufferer, which forces them to do things which are going to be really really difficult to cope with. Um, can I read a little bit
Yeah,
of?
please do. Please do.
Yeah, so Sarah Johnson, we'll put a link to this blog. It's a really nice blog. It's called No Sign Says It Is, and
Isn't it her Substack, just to be
yeah, that's right. It's her
pedantic? Yeah.
Substack. Yeah, sorry, it is. And English teachers from a few years ago will probably remember Tatum Carlo Africa's um, poem about District 6 in Cape Town, because it was on the GCSE syllabus for some years, not anymore. And there's a line in the poem where he says the narrator of the poem goes into this area that's no longer um, the apartheid system's been dismantled, but he remembers what it was like to be there, or to not to be allowed into that area as a black person in a whites only area. And he says the line in the poem says, "No sign says it is, but we know where we belong." And Sarah uses that idea in her blog, and I'm just going to read a little extract from it. And so, which is this. So when Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo took the stage, Davidson's coprolalia, completely different thing. Sorry, produced the N word, not because he meant it, not because it reflected anything he believes, but because that's how coprolalia works. It reaches for the word that will cause the most damage in any given moment. It is exquisitely, devastatingly context sensitive. The brain locks on to whatever's most taboo, most forbidden, most socially catastrophic, and fires it out like a reflex. The worse the consequence, the more likely the tick. And then she says of herself, "It's why I shout, I have a bomb in my," when I go through airports. "It's why I claim to be a paedophile at kids' parties. I've shouted out that I have AIDS when giving blood." Tourette's can be a clever beast. It picks the thing that you would be most mortified to say, shouts it into the room. It's not the elephant in the room you're ignoring, it's the great big elephant rampaging all around the spaces. You might want to shrink away and just enjoy the experience, but Tourette says no to that. It poisons that space so that every breath you take feels an uncomfortable burning breath each time a tick comes out into the open. And she sort of likens the experience of knowing you're about to tick, knowing you're about to do this, say the unsayable, as feeling like you're on the edge of a cliff and being compelled to jump, which is kind of a terrifying image, but really, really helpful, I think, to try and understand. Because I haven't seen I Swear either. I did see it was I don't know, the internet's always listening, isn't it? And it was presented. It came up on the algorithm the other night when I was flicking through, I don't know, Netflix or one of those things that I should watch it. So I'm sure I will. But I remember years ago seeing a documentary presented by, I can't remember the name escapes me, but it was an actor, and he was basically making a documentary about a load of lads who had Tourette's, and there was a scene exactly like that where one of them was, they were flying to America, and he was going for the airport, and the camera was on him, and he went, "Oh no," and he said, "Oh," and you could tell he was struggling, and there was a look of resignation in his eyes, and he shouted out, "Bomb!" And you could just see as he did it, it was like, "Oh my God, why am I doing this? Why can't I stop?" And the pathos was extraordinary.
Yeah, and let's go with that perhaps, because it's a condition that leads to a higher rate of suicide
Yeah,
and
that,
certainly
yeah,
suicidal ideation than with those who haven't got it, shall we say. So it's something that does lead to mortification.
yeah,
Um,
quite
but
literally.
yeah, and also there's, of course, the fact that shouting the N word also carries a degree of historical resonance
Yeah, of
that
course.
makes it more than just a swear word, more than
Yeah.
if I shouted the C word or the F word. The N word has a certain
Yeah.
resonance, especially at, for people who perhaps, um, if we are white, um, perhaps don't understand as much
No.
as other communities do.
And
So,
I
so
think,
we have these
yeah,
two things that come together. So, shouting out the C words, shouting out the F word, is something that people can perhaps, oh, you can cope with that. You can
yeah,
understand where that comes from.
yeah.
Shouting out you're a paedophile in a kid's party, then that's, we're starting to get beyond, we're adults together listening and we can sort of compartmentalize that. And the N word is, again, another level on that. So you can see how these, two wrongs don't make a right or whatever. We can't say that this is something that's easy to deal with. But in the classroom, if you're surrounded by, um, 30 kids and you've got one or two children there who have Tourette's, and one of them is shouting out things which are offensive to other kids in the classroom, how do you deal with that? In the case of the
Well,
BAFTAs, John Davidson
yeah.
excluded himself. He took himself out of the space, and this was meant to be one of the biggest days of his life when a film about his life is being,
Awarded.
lauded to the hilt. And he's saying, I cannot be included in the space, in the very space that is lauding my film, shows the level to which exclusion versus inclusion is a burning issue,
Yeah.
nationally and in
No.
classrooms around the country.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the criticism of the BBC is not only that they had a time delay and they could have chosen not to have aired the clip. They could have bleeped that out and gotten rid of it and avoided the social media storm. But also, what they could have done is explained to the audience about the context of the night and that John was there and that this felt and that that tics were a possibility. And Lindo and Johnson have both said that had they been told of the what was that this was a thing,
Okay,
they might have responded. They might have felt very differently.
BAFTAs explained it to the audience at
Yeah,
the BAFTAs. Are you saying that they didn't explain it to the people giving out awards?
I don't know.
Right, because they
That's
did.
my
They did
understanding.
say the people there were told that John
Okay.
was in the audience and he might call out, but whether that
All
was
right. Okay.
explained or
I don't know.
not.
I don't. So. I mean, I'm just thinking. I had an experience some years ago where my daughter, my eldest daughter, was performing and she, doing a concert to an audience. She used to be part of this rock and pop club, and they used to do little local gigs. And she was up there playing a guitar and singing, and a young man in the audience started to shout out sexually inappropriate stuff, and it was deeply uncomfortable for all involved. And and it transpired later that he had Tourette's, and his mum took him out of the audience, and she was really, really upset and angry about having to take him out. Obviously, she kind of understood the situation, but felt very deeply frustrated that the venue hadn't explained that he was there and what that might mean for the audience. And it was a really horrible set of experiences for everybody, for him, for the mum, for us as a family, for my daughter, and the rest of it was nobody got anything good out of that. And this was some years ago. This was like 10 plus, 10 years ago plus probably. But had had the venue, had the organisers dealt with it differently in advance, that some of that might have been averted. And I think that was the thing that we learned on Saturday, talking to some of the teachers of, of teachers who have taught children with Tourette's, that depending on the level of knowledge about what's going on and the policies of the school, that these experiences of teaching children who are ticking can be much more difficult or much more straightforward.
Yeah, and some of the policies, but I think the experiences that teachers were sharing were, in the main, positive. That the way it
Yeah,
was
I
being
think
dealt
so.
with.
I think there were a couple who sort of gave the idea that it kind of came out of nowhere and they didn't know what to do and it was all really grim. But quite a few teachers told us stories about the fact that because they were aware that they were teaching a child with coprolalia, that other children knew the context. And so when something happened, they were able to say, right, let's just remind ourselves what's going on here. This isn't about trying to
Yeah,
cause
what was the
offence. This
the
is
I've forgotten what she exactly said, but one teacher talked about, was it right 5 4 3 we pause or
Yeah,
something? What was that?
it was something like pens down, eyes up, some sort of reset policy where you just when there's been some kind of incident, you take a break as a teacher and lead a moment of mediated discussion to make sure everyone kind of gets what's going on before
Mm.
continuing with the lesson.
You could see it in a more chaotic classroom that if X manages to shout the C word every now and then, why can't I?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. And you can
it's
and
only
you can
fair, miss.
Yeah, no, you can absolutely see that, and you can absolutely see, if a word like the N word's used in a classroom, children not understanding or not believing that it isn't deliberate, and that leading to problems.
Yeah. I
Because
mean,
I think that's a widely held misunderstanding that that people with coprolalia are giving vent to their
yeah, and this
deepest,
is this has
darkest
come
beliefs.
across, I mean, a lot on social media, but also Saturday
Yeah,
Night Live did a skit about this, and it implied, in its rather ugly way, to put the blame on the person, or saying, so put a bunch of, I'm going to use Hillary Clinton's term, deplorables on there, blaming that they say these things, not because they believe them or anything like that. It's just because, hey, I got Tourette's, I can't help it, and blah de blah. But it didn't. I find Saturday Night Live, oddly, I think this is a across the pond thing, that we a lot of Brits don't get Saturday Night Live's humour. It just seems forced and overlong and badly done. But anyway, let's move on from that. How far can we have inclusion um, because of our own discomfort? I mean, when the bus
yeah.
comes, you're in a hurry in the morning, the bus comes along to the bus stop and you see, oh God, there's someone with a wheelchair getting on. So the bus has got to let out its ramp, go down on one side, the person with the
That's
wheelchair
the
gets on.
same here, Martin.
I mean, I mean, it makes me 3 minutes late,
I
that
can
sort of thing.
see
I mean,
that. Yeah, the
how can
suffering is real.
someone speeding down on the pavement on their motorized wheelchair? Number of times I get run over or backed into, beep beep beep. I mean, goodness sake, or
Do you get that a
a
lot?
blind person with a stick. You've got to get
Yeah,
out of their
waving their
way.
stick
All this
about.
stuff. I mean,
Do you
how
know the
can one
worst?
cope?
Mothers with pushchairs.
I know
They're
they're
much more
everywhere.
aggressive. Yeah,
Can't
they're
we
really
just have
aggressive.
me on the pavement getting
Yeah,
about my business and everyone else out of the way? No, how far can schools be expected to bend towards the inclusion of others? So, I mean, we obviously I was being
yeah,
facetious and making humour out of a
yeah,
terrible situation, perhaps, but there are situations where if your classroom is being disrupted a lot through behavioural challenges because of someone's reaction to their needs,
yeah.
that it becomes almost impossible, and these are extreme
Mm,
situations, almost impossible to continue the lesson in the form that it was originally intended. Perhaps it's a
yeah,
violent outburst, perhaps it's
yeah,
but these are behavioural responses that a child might be having due to issues going on, whether it be perhaps an over anxious response to something that's
Yeah.
happened in the lesson, or whatever. And I say over anxious advisedly. But how do we cope?
Yeah, how do we cope? I mean, I think that coprolalia is a really interesting edge case because we're making the point that it is completely involuntary, and I think that as such, you can, people who have coprolalia aren't shouting things out and then folding their arms and looking smug and grinning at the chaos that ensues. They are, as you said, they are mortified by it. It's really destructive for them, and they'd like the floor to open up and eat them. And and I think the sensitivity to that kind of experience. So as a teacher, knowing that you're teaching a child with that kind of issue, you can deal with that completely differently to a child that is willfully and joyously disrupting your lesson. I've
But
taught
that's, you're putting in
children
the terms
who,
willfully and joyfully there. But
yeah,
if they're
yeah, yeah,
doing
yeah,
that and
yeah,
it's not willful,
I am.
not joyful, they are doing it as a stress response to something.
Right. Well, so I mean that's the point I'm making, Martin. I think that you can tell as a teacher when that. So if a child shouts out something really unfortunate and you intervene, and then they argue with you and and laugh in your face and that kind of thing, then it's reasonable to treat that differently to them being mortified by it and saying, "Christ, I'm really sorry that happened. That's not what I wanted."
Okay, but let's talk about a kid with behavioural issues,
Yeah.
and these issues perhaps are
Let's do that.
a response to trauma, as people put it, or whatever. That you are expected to include the child. It's the policy of the school to include the child in the
Yeah,
lesson. That there is
yeah.
perhaps a special needs form that goes around EHCP or whatever it might be.
EHCP, yeah. We,
Um,
we might talk about the SEM white paper in a moment.
these things. Now, if there's likely to kick off, he says in inverted
Yeah,
commas, and it does, and it might involve. I mean, there's certain responses with a child with autism. There's a wonderful
yeah,
documentary on, and we're talking about a certain type of autism, but these mothers were talking about how violent their child gets.
yeah,
And how and it was shown the child hitting the mother, etc., etc.
yeah,
I mean, how far can we go and say, well, it's not their fault, but
yeah,
this is too destructive towards
yeah,
the
yeah.
way? Just as you could say to John Davidson, no, I think it's best you leave the room now.
Well, except they didn't. He
No, but
decided,
he
I
did
think
to
it's best I
himself.
leave the
He
room.
did to
Yeah,
himself.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean,
exactly, exactly.
it's still
And I think,
exclusion and
yeah,
inclusion.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
it
yeah,
can no matter
yeah,
whether it's the teacher or the
yeah.
child or in
So
this case the adult.
you can't have public spaces where people are at risk. So you can't expect teachers to be punched and kicked. You can't expect other children to be in an environment where that's a possibility because someone's
But
got
these
no
mothers
control
were,
over the
showing love by staying with their
being
kid.
punched. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's that's one of the big differences between being a parent
Yeah.
and being a teacher. And it's really, really interesting, I think, that if you go into hospitals, doctor surgeries, airports, they're festooned with signs about zero tolerance and that we will not tolerate any aggressive behaviour towards our staff. And yet in schools there is a belief that's fairly commonly held that people who work in schools should be able to tolerate that kind of behaviour because the people who are displaying the behaviour are children. And I think it's reasonable to think about adaptations that we can make, and it's reasonable to think that if a child is vulnerable to that kind of outburst, there are mechanisms that it might be possible to put in place, and that it's probably true to say for a majority that they can feel a lack of control coming, and they can exercise some judgment about what would be the most sensible thing to do preceding a violent outburst. But if you get to the point where it's not safe, then that's the limit of inclusion there, isn't it? I think.
But there's also talking about, I've forgotten the word, where you try and moderate your own behaviour. What's it called? Anyway, let's talk about moderating your own behaviour, learning to moderate your own behaviour.
Self-regulation. Is that
Self-regulation. There you go.
right?
Thank you. That's the term I was
Pleasure.
after.
Yeah.
Now, how do you learn to self-regulate if you're just not included in the room?
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of the kind of issues about self-regulation is that all children are relatively poor at self-regulation compared to adults. That it relies
Some
on
adults, shall we say?
the myelination of your prefrontal cortex. Yeah, no, on average,
Yeah.
and so it's not you don't reach your biological potential for self-regulation until you're in your early to mid 20s. So yeah, and teenagers are particularly vulnerable because they're much more prone to risk taking and doing silly things, and that haven't yet developed necessarily the kind of self-regulation required to manage those risks and behaviour
David
sensibly
there
and
smiling
carefully.
away because he's remembering his own teenage years.
I was a little toe rag. I was a bugger.
I'm not saying anything
And
about my teenage years, by the way.
well, you were a good boy. I know that.
Oh,
So,
yes, I wasn't. Anyway, carry on.
yeah, and anyway, part of becoming an adult is that we learn how to self-regulate, and some of us do that more successfully than others.
Yeah.
And it's why for instance, it's why we have a criminal justice system, for people that haven't been able to self-regulate in certain circumstances. We decide that they
Except
can't
for
be
those that we put
included
in the
within.
House of Lords, of course.
Well, yeah,
Let's
but
move on.
the point's there, isn't it? That um, I find driving on a motorway is a really interesting sort of microcosm of human behaviour, isn't it? And the people that want to drive up behind you and flash their
Are
lights
you
and
a
beat their horn
are
to
you a
make you.
centre lane hogger?
No, I'm not a centre lane hogger, but people who there are people that behave with that sense of entitlement,
In their big cars.
and and are unable to regulate them. Yeah, it's always BMW drivers, isn't it?
You want to point the finger.
They're unable to regulate themselves in that context, and it's obviously that leads to sort of people beeping each other and flicking the V's, and in extreme cases getting into violent altercations and
At
break grip.
70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour,
At
90
70,
miles an
yeah,
hour.
very dangerous. And children haven't yet, as I've suggested, aren't able to take responsibility for themselves in quite the way that we expect of an adult. Obviously we have ages of criminal responsibility, and we're kind of there's gradations in
12.
Yeah, is it 10?
12. Well, yeah, there's 10 and 12 in this country.
Yeah,
I think, but it's 10
yeah.
that you're responsible and 12 that you can be punished for, or something like that.
Okay, all right.
Please write
All
in,
right.
listeners and
Yeah,
watchers.
let us know.
Let us know.
We could just look it up, couldn't we?
We could, but we're not going to.
But part of being a child and becoming an adult, part of the experience of going to school is that schools provide relatively safe places to make mistakes. Schools are much, much more forgiving places than the brutal adult world, which is not at all forgiving.
So we should be forgiving, you're implying, of a certain
God, we should always be forgiving. Yeah, we should always be forgiving. But at the same time, there are limits that we can't tolerate in the here and now.
Okay, so I'm running
So
a super strict school. I'm the super strict
yeah,
head teacher of, note.
I can picture
And
it now. You'd probably be wearing a tie.
and everyone is doing my slant. I slant in my school. We all slant and do all this sort of stuff, and we're
Yeah,
all quiet and we all,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely walk very at the same speed during through
All of that. Yeah, yeah.
corridors and on the left hand side, and we're silent all the time. Now, bung me some problems into that situation. How tolerant should I be?
Right. So there's a difference between tolerant and forgiving, isn't there? First of all, so I, I'm sure you visited schools like that, haven't you, Martin?
Yeah, I walked on the wrong side of the corridor. Yeah.
Well, I bet you did. I bet you did it on purpose too.
There you are.
Um, but the schools like that. It's much harder for children to misbehave because of the social pressures, the peer pressures
No, it's not about
from other
misbehavior.
children.
Hold it. No, we're talking about
Okay.
involuntary actions.
Ah, okay. All
So
right.
not just Tourette's, but other behavioural
Okay.
responses to. We're not talking about kids being naughty.
All
Trying
right,
to
right.
make
Okay.
this.
Well, so take your super
How
strict school
tolerant
then
should
with
we
silent
be
corridors,
of people who
and
can't
there's a
do things?
child with Tourette's who finds that stressful and is ticking. We should be absolutely tolerant of that. And I think that I'm making a claim here, which I don't have evidence for, but my assumption would be that in a school like that, which is very calm and ordered, and where a child does have that kind of involuntary reaction, I would, I'm suggesting it's much more likely that other children would be, that's them. I know that that's their thing. And the adults there would be, yeah, okay, we can manage that because everyone else is calm, everything else is ordered. And so it's much safer and easier for everyone. Whereas if you're in a school with chaotic corridors and
Hmm.
unruly behavior, and then you add on somebody having violent outbursts and uh, ticking behaviour, then that becomes much more difficult for everybody
Yeah,
involved.
I think there's a difference between a chaotic school and a school that's rigid. There was something someone again put
Yeah,
it
of course.
on social media this week about being able to tell when they go into a school how caring it is, and how that it's a rigid school, but they could feel that
Yeah,
whether that it wasn't good, that that you can feel whether the school is understanding and
yeah. I mean,
supportive and those things.
I don't know whether that's true, but I do remember years ago going to visit King Solomon's Academy
Hmm. That's the
in
Jewish school
in
in North London. Yeah.
no, it's not
No.
Jewish. No, it's an
Okay.
it's part of the Ark chain,
Okay.
and it was set up under the free school. It's a free
Yeah.
school, but it's not a Jewish school. It's
Okay.
in Edgware, I think. Anyway, it was, but this was before Michaela had been
Yeah.
founded, and it was the very first time that I'd visited a school which had things like silent corridors and that sort of thing, and I was really interested to visit. I wanted to know what it might be like, and so I asked if I could go and visit, and they were keen for me to do that. So I went, and I was waiting in reception for somebody to meet me, and a child was having a breakdown, an absolute meltdown
Mm.
in the reception area, and um, and what I reflected on is that it doesn't matter what your school culture is, it doesn't matter how strict it is. Sometimes children are going to
Mm.
be children, and they're
Yeah.
going to, something's going to go wrong,
Mm.
and they're going to be unable to regulate themselves. And the but what struck me was the way that the adult in this scenario was able to remain calm and be able to deal with. I can't remember the details of it, but able to deal with the situation, and that I'm sure was easier because it was the only incident going on. It was the
Yeah.
only
No.
moment
Absolutely.
of
Absolutely. I'm just wondering if there's a level of schools that cannot
Mm.
tolerate or do not wish to tolerate as much as other schools are
Wow.
able to do so, and whether that on the chaotic end we can
Yeah.
that's a different thing, but on
Yeah.
the ordered end, if we're saying that there's
Yeah.
this steady um, spectrum between order and disorder, then on the ordered
Yeah.
side of schools is whether there's a move at all to exclude certain students from coming to a school because we can't cope with that kind of behaviour.
Yeah.
There's a tolerance that we will not go beyond, and whether that tolerance is drawn in the right place or the wrong place. And we're talking hypotheticals here. By the way, there are more than
What's
one King Solomon school, one of which is Jewish and
uh
one of which is a
okay.
non-denominational, blah, blah, blah. But
Okay.
anyway,
So this is King Solomon Academy.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
assume the other King Solomon is not an academy.
It's a
Anyway,
Jewish
anyway.
Jewish school in Ilford.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
anyway,
okay.
go on.
Well, okay. But Wayne, what's your view on that, Martin? Are you aware of schools that are
Now, when
intolerant
we
of
say are we aware of schools,
yeah?
we better be on very sound ground to
Because it's
say yes, we
well, you're
are.
right because
We are
it's a
aware of the
commonly
rumours that there
yeah,
are schools that
exactly,
exclude
exactly.
or do their best to include certain types and not other types, shall we say,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
etc., etc. So I can't say I'm aware of schools that do it. I'm aware of the rumours.
Yeah, exactly. So there's lots of rumours and there's lots of sort of activism that takes the view that schools are horrible, intolerant places staffed with people that don't care about kids, that just want to get rid of any awkward, troublesome children. And that might be true. And it probably, with a system with thousands of schools, it's going to be probably true in some cases. But I've I've in all of the hundreds of schools that I've worked with over the years. Well, one, nobody ever admits to that. That's not something that anyone badges up and says that's us. That is so. And I think that it's important to remember that part of human nature is that we all think we're the goodies. We all think, we all explain away our behavior and our attitudes and beliefs in the most positive lights. So otherwise, it's impossible to live with the cognitive dissonance of thinking you're a terrible person. So everybody thinks they're doing what's right and in the best interests of the children. That even Tory politicians think that, Martin. Um, and
They've all joined
so
Reform now, haven't they? I
I
don't know.
know exactly. So the ones that the really evil ones have gone to reform. You're right.
Oh, is that it?
Um,
Oh, oh.
oof, oof.
Suella, if you're
I mean,
watching, he didn't mean it.
Swella. But probably in the case of Genric, it's fair, isn't it?
I don't know. I've got no
I think it
idea.
is.
I could,
Yeah, you have.
some people move because they think their career could be advanced, perhaps.
Yes, that's no doubt true. I'm
Like
sure some
Macbeth.
people.
Macbeth would have moved to Reform.
Yeah, I'm sure some people joined the Nazi Party because
Oh
it was in the
no,
interest
no,
of
no,
career
no, no!
advancement.
Dear,
I've
oh
done
dear.
it.
You've done
I've
it.
done
You've
it.
made the obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh my
have.
goodness. Dear, oh
I
dear.
know, I know. Anyway, so I can't remember what we were talking about, but yeah.
Nazification.
So are there schools like this? Maybe there are. Maybe there are some school leaders that take this kind of view. I don't think they're the majority, and I don't think it's anywhere near as common as the rumor mill would want people to believe. But does it happen sometimes? Probably, inevitably. And there are going to be situations where, and my experience of, being a trustee of a multi academy trust and being, and sitting on a lot of panels where, schools are agonizing about exclusion decisions is I've never ever been to one of those meetings where everybody involved isn't absolutely battered and made miserable by the decision to exclude a student.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
that has I've never experienced that in a
But
way where
are
it
we,
feels like we've done a good thing here.
with
Everybody agonises over this.
the whole area of EHCPs
Mm,
and SEN is getting to quite a few schools now. It's becoming unmanageable, the level.
yeah.
And certainly financially, it's becoming a huge drain
Well,
nationally,
and as we know, yeah, the government have just, for those that don't know, have written off local authority debts that have been accrued through funding EHCPs, which was massive, really, really considerable in many cases. But that has just moved the problem elsewhere. It hasn't taken away the expense, but it has kind of unblocked some of the bottleneck
I mean,
potentially.
they're bringing in a white paper.
What were the stats you were saying the other day about Glasgow?
Well, we disagreed on this, didn't we? So I'm now completely undermined, and you're throwing that at me. I need to look it out. I was talking about Scotland, and I said it was something like 60% of kids in schools in Scotland or something have an EHCP or the equivalent.
No, yeah.
And
So it's
you
slightly
said
less
no,
extreme
it's
than
it's
that, but
it's it's about 50%, and it's Glasgow. You told me
it's
so.
over 50%, and
Well,
it's not
I said
EHCPs.
50.
It's yeah, yeah, no, it's over 50%, and it's but a majority of children in Glasgow apparently have special needs,
Which is
and
understandably possible because you could have an area. You don't have the bell curve equal to every sort of school at every sort of neighbourhood, is it?
it's possible. It's possible. It
Yeah,
might be
and where you
that,
draw the
but
line is, again,
yeah,
this is the thing about where the mindset where special need, and
yeah,
there's a
exactly. We
clear
all have
delineation.
needs.
There isn't. These things
They're
are
special for everybody. You
movable
know,
feasts.
everybody's special. Everybody has needs. It just the children who have needs that are most profound and most difficult to accommodate potentially are more marginalised when the majority of children who have behaviour which in the past would have fallen into the normal range are reclassified as having special educational needs potentially.
Yeah, but and this becomes the problem if you're
Yeah.
expecting certain behaviours to be different than before, then more people will sort of fit into a certain category. So someone would say, if you went to a school which is expecting more academically than schools did in the past, and therefore it might be that those who were less likely to succeed in an academic school will find it more of a struggle.
Potentially, although I mean, there's Ben Newmark who is over on Blue Sky.
Finely dressed,
Oh yeah,
smart,
very
the
well, very
smart.
very dapper young man. Wrote an article in Schools Week where he describes EHCPs and the special educational needs world as the last bastion of unevidenced practice,
Hmm.
and that Schools Week themselves had run an investigation into the kinds of practices and recommendations that were on EHCPs, and it includes all sorts of stuff about fidget spinners and
Hmm.
coloured paper and all sorts of things for which there is no evidence beyond placebo or Hawthorne effects, and that we've even including things like learning styles, which has been
Hmm.
sort of systematically debunked and removed from the majority of education spaces, is apparently alive and well in the special needs world, and
Yeah, that
that's kind of
doesn't.
really worrying that the children who are most vulnerable are at the the greatest risk of being exposed to, for want of a better word, nonsense.
Yeah, but you're adding in there that these kids are vulnerable kids, so that there is, whether the vulnerable kid is helped by having a fidget spinner or not is not the point. They're still a vulnerable kid.
Go on, explain the
So
point.
where you're drawing the line is saying, are you saying that people with EHCPs, there's a vast majority of them actually, it's going too far, that these aren't special
So
needs kids,
what I'm
etc.,
so
etc.? Or are you saying
what I'm
that too many of them have just said, right, here's a fidget spinner, we're doing something, tick?
Right. Well, a bit of both. I think but maybe because we've got in some cases, a majority of children who are diagnosed as having a special educational need or disability, and in such a system where a majority are classified as having special needs, how can any school, how can any system meet all of those needs? And so, in such a system, is it more likely, is it more possible for people just to sort of throw nonsense ideas into these plans because they haven't got time or energy or capacity to actually apply them and build them with the rigor needed to genuinely help those children? Is it the case that whether or not they're correctly classified, but children who have vulnerabilities in the system end up being given the weakest support possible um, because of their classification?
Yeah. I mean,
Well, that's a terrifying idea, isn't it?
why? Why terrifying?
Well, if we're saying that more and more children are being classified as having special needs, and those who are classified as having special needs are getting the worst educational support, then actually having a special needs diagnosis means that you are less likely to be helped than children who haven't, exacerbating the divide between the haves and the have-nots, between the most and the least advantaged.
Yeah. I mean, there's an article today I don't know if it was today, but it's got online today in the TES about the ASD spectrum by one of the people who came up with the idea of the spectrum in the first place, who now thinks it's
Uta Frith.
gone too far.
Yeah, she no longer thinks autism is a spectrum.
She thinks there's two types.
Well, that's the headline of the article. Why I no longer think autism is a spectrum. Do you think that mischaracterises?
No, she thinks there's two types of autism, and
Yeah.
one of which is the one where the classic autism with unable to perhaps
The one we grew up
difficult with
knowing about.
language or and then there's the other one which is sort of
Diagnosed later.
yeah, for those particularly girls who are diagnosed later. It seems to be. I've got the article in front of me, and I don't want to misquote it. But so she said the ratio seemed to be 4-1 girls, and more recently 3-1 in children diagnosed before age 10. This ratio has remained the same over decades. Is there a cultural bias against identifying girls and women as autistic? I don't think so. We know, for example, that psychopathy is overwhelmingly male. Do we ask whether psychopathic girls have been overlooked? I haven't seen anything like it. So she's sort of talking here about it's that the girls who are perhaps are oversensitive almost. She's almost saying that. Or at least the way it could be misunderstood that she's saying that. But she's also saying that, schools and places that just reduce the lights or put on ear defenders and things is like your fidget spinner. This is not particularly, here's the word, hypersensitive. She's saying they're hypersensitive. We don't currently have a separate label, but it might make sense to treat them as hypersensitive. Now, hypersensitive is like all these terms, something that is loaded. You can almost say that hypersensitive is a sort of thing you might say to a child who is you're being a bit hypersensitive, as though that they can control that they can do something about it, like the Tourette's kid shouting out. Well, perhaps you're if you're hypersensitive, it sounds like you're blaming the victim there, perhaps.
Yeah, I guess it could sound like that, and I suppose the thing to sort of bear in mind here is that hypersensitivity isn't being used in a pejorative sense; it's being used in a medicalized sense. There, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is the issue with all terms and all labels, even if the word disorder is argued about.
Yeah. So she's saying, isn't she, or this article saying that the number of children with EHCPs for autism has tripled over the last 10 years, and that accounts for 40% of the total increase in education healthcare plans.
Hmm.
That is remarkable, isn't it?
It's certainly remarkable in that it is the cynical amongst us could always say, well, we didn't have that sort of autism when I was a young kid. We didn't have that
Yeah.
going on. We didn't have ADHD when I was younger. We didn't have
No.
those things.
Well,
But
yeah.
but we didn't have all sorts of things when
Yeah.
I was younger,
So
and when I was younger, the elder people then could say, well, we didn't have that. We didn't have the
we didn't have the internet then,
we
did we?
didn't have this, that, and the other. That always
Yeah.
happens. But we if you go back, everything was treated with leeches,
Yeah.
and still are. There's still some things about blood clotting and things like that that can be treated by leeches, by the way. But
Yeah.
anyway,
It's good
perhaps
to
your
know.
leg, perhaps you should get a leech
I'm
rather than
gonna
that strange orange thing you've got, contraption you've got. A leech on your leg, that'll sort you out. Anyway.
maybe so. Yeah, I'll look into it. Thank you for the medical advice there, Dr. Robinson. No, I think, and there's an interesting point there, and I've on your recommendation, Martin, because the last time we talked about this stuff, you mentioned it. I read Dr. Sam Timimini's book, Searching for Normal, where he talks about the fact that autism, and not autism alone, but autism, for instance, you can't identify somebody suffering with autism from their genes. You can't identify them from brain scans. The only way that they are identifiable is through, the subjective opinion of somebody's subjective experiences, like
And the occurrence of
subjectivity
some
squared.
comorbidities as well. But
Maybe,
which
but
are there?
but
Which are there?
well, in some cases,
Hmm.
for not for all, by any means, but in some cases that might be the case, and so he says that the word diagnosis is entirely inappropriate because diagnosis implies some kind of scientific process which can't be applied to categorizing somebody as autistic. But I think the most interesting thing that he talks about in his book is he describes the system in which this takes place as the mental health industrial complex, and he talks about the fact that the medical world has been captured by the forces of capitalism, and the pressure on people who are struggling with life in society, there's pressure to identify them as being problematic and not society as being problematic. The pressure on people to change rather than the system to change. The pressure on giving children or adults labels or medication or whatever and saying you need to do something about you in order to fit into what is potentially a very broken society where we're asking people to do quite unnatural, difficult things that maybe the people who say things like, we never had that in the past, maybe the world was a bit more conducive to a greater range of human experience. So, for instance, if you're not expecting people to sit down quietly all day and then go on screens in their spare time, and instead they're outside in nature, running about, maybe they're much less likely to have ADHD. Because they're the
No, but
symptoms are a response
they can
to
still have ADHD, but they can manage it. It's more manageable
well,
because
or or it's so manageable that it never occurs to
Yeah,
anyone that there might be any kind of
that's it. Yeah,
syndrome occurring.
this is a very
And
good.
calling
This,
it a syndrome
yeah.
is
But
perhaps
what the
locating
point
the
I was
problem
making,
with the
perhaps
individual instead of locating it in society.
the school is adding to the issue. Not just the school, but the
Yeah, the
society
system. Yeah,
that we create around us. Which
excuse me. Yeah,
obviously the same with allergies. That there's certain things that are going on in the
yeah,
society that cause responses
yeah.
that people would have been manageable become more difficult to manage because of the society in which we live. And on that note, we have reached exactly 1 hour in today's discussion at that point. So
We've
look,
wasted quite enough of people's
I
time, haven't
think
we?
we've wasted enough of everyone's time. And, see you next time.
But before you
Next
go,
place. Hang on, I'm just going to put a
don't
like and
forget.
subscribe up, by the way.
Exactly. Don't
There
forget.
you
I was
go.
going to say that. Don't forget to like and subscribe and enroll and tell us comments
Yeah.
and all the things. We've missed you. I hope you missed us. We're going to endeavour to be a bit more regular, and the hiatus hopefully is
There we go.
over.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.